Hey there, legends and star pals. This is Lindsay Turner and Sarah Knoll here with your January 2025 month ahead. Month ahead.
How do you make an air horn sound?
I know.
Like
I
do the
swear to
famous
God,
gesture.
this will be the year that I get a sound effects board where I can add sound effects to our
Nice.
podcasts and month ahead forecast because yeah, I just feel like it's an essential component to these sorts of things at this stage in the game where technology is. I mean, been to the moon.
Yep.
We have Cybertrucks catching on fire.
Yes. One of Trump hotels.
I need an electronic air horn. Yeah. Yeah. So we're here. Sarah and I decided a few months ago that we were going to start offering our month ahead forecasts just on the internet, just for people to watch. So good. There's always a degree of risk that you take when you start to just put things out there. But we thought it would be a healthy risk at this point for the most part. Yeah, and with what better thing to do than expose yourself on the internet during a Mars retrograde opposite Pluto?
Oh,
What could go wrong?
yeah.
What could go wrong?
Today's the day. We're here.
We're here. We are here. So we're gonna talk about what that means. Talk about the full moon and the new moon this month, and just some major alignments that maybe we want to be paying attention to. And yeah, how were your holidays, Sarah? It feels like a year has happened since early December. Like, what even was that?
Yeah. Um, my holidays were good. We did some travel to the middle of the country to be with family and then some travel back. We looked at some schools for Ira. Um, and yeah, and I'm at work. And so it feels calm in some ways. And then also I'm as usual, taking on some ambitious challenges for the year ahead. So I chose my word of the year. I'm choosing the word cleave in honor of a Mars retrograde cycle through my 12th and 1st, and um, preparing to become an empty nester during this Gregorian calendar year. So yeah, be doing some relational, separate, together kinds of work here over in Sarah Land. Yeah.
That's big stuff. And honestly, I think that that is going to be a pretty appropriate theme for many people for 2025. Just thinking of all of the action that we have coming up, particularly in the sign of Aries. Interesting that that's your moon sign, motherhood, mothering, right?
Yes.
And Aries being ruled by Mars, which has these significations of severing, of leaving, of cutting, right? Of dividing and
Yeah.
saying like, okay, this goes over here and this goes over here now. And that's quite literal for you in 2025.
Yeah. And having natal Mars and Cancer, I think I never remember like is Mars separating? Because I feel like for me, Mars is in Cancer where it's hold on tight, everyone. And so
Yeah.
like sorting through those themes it's an appropriate time for me to do some of that.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Wow. Well, I'll be there for you.
I know it. Don't I know it? We'll be cleaving. So I love this word that means both to stick together and to separate. That's a really amazing word. And so, yeah, I know that we will be cleaving.
Oh, wow. I hadn't even thought of that. That's beautiful. Good. I love that. Well, yeah. And you can't come together unless you're separate, right? Like that.
Yes,
So there
this is
is
true.
some, yeah, very interesting word of the year. I
You
haven't
had some
done
sexy holidays, if I understand correctly. Let's hear about
sexy.
your holidays.
It was so, let me tell you how erotic it was to get RSV over Christmas, have to cancel everything. I mean, if there was a sexy part of it, it was the canceling everything. Not because I really wanted to do that, but as a Cancerian, I really enjoy any opportunity to just be like, I guess I just have to stay at home.
That's
Um,
sad.
yeah, it was unfun. And then right at the tail end of being sick, I got my period because of course, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then had like a 3-day migraine. And so I was just
Oh
like,
gosh.
I'm on the other side of that. I'm coming through. I'm really glad. But yeah, it was a sickly was a very sickly Christmas. And I have to laugh because Christmas Eve, we had that Jupiter Saturn square, right? And Jupiter rules my sixth house of illness, and Saturn's
Mhm.
mowing through my sixth house of illness. And so, yeah, I just thought this is appropriate. This is
Mhm.
appropriate timing, right, to get sick on Christmas. So, but what I, was going to add to Cleve is that I have not done any of my typical uh designing of the year, which I normally do. Like last year I did omens, I did, I don't think I did a word of the year, but like tarot cards, resolutions. I haven't done any of it, and I it's very interesting because the nodes are moving into my 6th and 12th. So I'm
Mhm.
having eclipses, started having eclipses in the fall in these areas of like physical and mental health. Fine. So for this year, I have like no designs on the year. I just kind of decided not to do resolutions. I didn't really do omens, although I've had some really strong ones come through. It's funny how that works. Um, and, you know, what I really am hoping to do is just carve out lots of space to just be creative this year and or not to just so
Yeah.
I'm kind of excited about that. I'm like, I'm not trying to do anything this year other than, you know, take care of myself, which feels new. Because I think I've spent so long defining myself by my ambitions. And I'm like, what if I didn't do that and tried something else? So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. But I think regardless, 2025 is, and we're doing our year ahead forecast tomorrow. Hopefully, I have this like up before then, but if not, it'll, I think we'll make it available for purchase because we're recording it. 2025 is a big year, and I think I loved, Austin Coppock called it the great rearrangement, and I think that that
Mhm.
is such a kind of beautiful, like, there's been some fear-mongering around 2025. And look, the world is always scary.
Always,
It's always
always.
scary. It's gonna continue to be scary, but I think that, if change is what you're seeking,
Guess what? You are
2025 is gonna
in
bring it.
luck. Fate and fortune smiles on the one who craves change.
Yeah.
Seismic levels of change, these ingresses, these outer planet changes. I mean, I think this year, I think it's really hard to know what the year is going to feel like or look like. I think it's going to be a time of like watching it unfold. And I love your method of like, how can I create lots of spaces for rest, creativity? I think that there's going to be a lot coming at us collectively, probably individually as well. So, how do we arrange the space so that there's, yeah, like you always talk about with Virgo, like there's an extra room because you just don't know who's going to show up. You just don't know. And
Yeah.
2025 is going to be a year where there's going to be unexpected visitors. I think we're going to have that bed made up.
From your mouth to God's ears. Well, let's talk
Yeah,
about January. I mean, it's certainly not a quiet
it
month.
is not quiet.
It's not as loud as March and April, which are really
Right.
going to be our like pivotal months of 2024, I do believe. But there are some really big important things happening in January. Top of mind for me is the ongoing Mars retrograde that we're in and the second opposition that it's making to Pluto. I think, is it while we're recording this? Is that what's
Yes,
happening right
it's
now?
well, I think it happened, early in the wee hours of the morning,
Okay.
but
So
certainly it is upon us. Being in the hospital
we're
this
in
week
it.
is wild times,
Ooh,
wild
I feel
times.
like it's always very violent when there's Mars Pluto contacts.
The
Hospital
helicopters
for you.
are just landing. taking off, landing, taking off. It is
Uh,
constant around here. Yeah.
Gosh, yes. And of course, we've seen some really like devastating violence in like New Orleans in the last few days.
And
There's a lot going on.
cars, exploding cars. It feels so literal
Yeah.
for Mars. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. So we have the ongoing Mars retrograde opposite Pluto. We're going to have the peak of Mars retrograde this month. So when we have Mars opposite the sun, which may as well be the Lindsay Turner National
I was
Holiday,
just
because
thinking, like, teach us, teach us.
I have this configuration in my chart. It's my closest aspect is Mars opposite the sun. For better or worse, right? It's the good, bad, and ugly in there. So we'll chat about that a little bit. And we have the nodes moving into their new signs, into Virgo and Pisces, out of Aries and Libras, which they moved into in July of 2023. So I think those are probably my top three like planetary alignments. And then of course we have the full moon and the new moon to look at. I'm wondering if there's anything else that you want to make sure that we cover for the month ahead, Sarah.
When I was looking at the month, the only kind of small thing, and I don't necessarily have a clear idea of what I think it's going to mean, but you made a reference to March and April, and I was noticing in January, it feels um, like before something big is going to happen, you know how like maybe before a big meetup of some kind, like there's a lot of one-on-one individual conversations that are happening. And this is what January feels like to me, particularly when I look at the moon and Mercury. I feel like the moon and Mercury are like, okay, I want to touch base with you. 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 Like all of this is going to converge in a certain kind of way in a couple of months, but it felt really cool to look at what Mercury is doing too. Again, I don't have like a super
Uh,
clear sense of what I think, but I did notice
uh,
some Mercury aspects that I think will be
Mercury is
interesting to keep track of.
Yeah, Mercury sure is busy, like, just kind of, like, looking down the list on my honeycomb planner, and I'm just like, I see a lot of, like, Mercury and the Sun are making a lot of
Yeah.
sparks this month. Um, so, yeah, it is I think it is, strategizing and re-strategizing are
Mhm.
huge themes for this month. I know personally, I am, like,
Mhm.
coming back to a table that I thought I had left
Mhm.
foolishly. I thought I had left because it was, like,
Oh,
yeah, you know
don't
what
want
it's
to
about.
hear that.
Uh, about a week or 2 after Mars stationed retrograde, I thought that we had come to a big resolution with something in my community, in my life, and we we did not. So, um, yeah, really coming back to the table, I think, yeah, if we're looking at Mars retrograde, right? Like Mars stationed on December 6th at 6 degrees Leo, and on January 6th on Epiphany, of
Nice.
all days, when we talk about this story of like going home by another way,
Yeah.
Mars moved back into Cancer, will move back into Cancer, into the sign of its fall, right? And so but this Mars and Cancer retrograde, I think, is going to be sort of the loudest stuff going on this month. Um it to me, I think of, and you have this natally, Sarah, so you can speak to the natal placement, but the transit, like it seems like a lot of you know, like defensiveness, reactivity, protection around things that are near and dear, familiar, familial, like comforting, homeland, like, your clan, your the things that are like near and dear to your heart. And I also see this like painful mixing of violence where it shouldn't be, right?
Yes.
Because we have Cancer is like the home, it's mothers and babies, right? It's vulnerable, it's to like vulnerability. And Mars is like, yeah, it's the knife, it's the gun, it's wants to cleave. And so when we mix those two topics, right, it can feel a little like, why are we killing so many women and children, right? In Gaza, like what's going on? I mean, just people, right? Why are people being forced to march out of the last hospital in the zone, right?
Yes.
Just things like that feel very Mars and Cancer to me, very Mars retrograde. Um, and yeah, I'm wondering what you have to add to that, Sarah, about Mars and Cancer.
I've been thinking, I mean, no shocker. I've been thinking a lot about like what does Mars and Cancer really mean? What is the fallen place of Mars? Like defending and fighting for what we love is not a fallen activity. It's not a distorted activity. It's a really natural thing to do. And of course, every planet has a home in each sign in a way. But this is not really where Mars wants to be. I think of Mars and Cancer, especially a retrograde cycle through that placement as a chance to revisit like where do we have like distorted or misplaced urges to protect and defend? Where are we
Mhm.
bringing aggression in a place where it may not actually help? Like a mother defending a baby, I don't think any of us would look at that and go, well, that's really messed up. Like
Yeah.
that's really distorted. Like we look at that and go, yeah, that's the way of things. Those are our instincts working. But what about, and I'm in the hospital, so these, examples are coming to me really easily. What about the mother in the hospital who won't let the staff do the work with the child that needs to be done so that the child can get better? This is like a
Mm.
way that protective impulses can become distorted. Or like for me personally, there's always this theme of like, I want you close, and then that closeness is a little suffocating, and then I want you far. And so that kind of like ambivalence about intimacy and severing, separateness and togetherness. I think
Mm.
this Mars retrograde is a time I think that we can revisit some of those themes for each of us individually, for nation states, like what is defending, what needs to be defended, and then like what is just misplaced aggression. I think those kinds of themes are really helpful. This is a great time to be revisiting these things, I think. It
Mm.
is for me personally, and I definitely see it in like our political arenas as well.
Course. Yes, because what we haven't mentioned yet is that we have Inauguration Day in the US this month. The day that that happens, we have a Sun-Pluto conjunction. Wow. Just talk about like shining the light on the status of like power dynamics in our country, on abuse dynamics, right? On some of the promises of this next president, and how they're a little terrifying, right? And um, just things that are things that have been ongoing in the US now, since the Pluto return. So, pretty interesting timing for that alignment. So, and then, throwing Mars and Cancer into the picture, is also very interesting when we're talking about uh, a sort of reactionary defenses of the homeland, right?
Yeah.
Like things that violences that are done in the name of protecting the nation that really are completely unnecessary, or that are sort of like um, actually, you know, thinly veiled, just racisms or other forms of systemic domination. So, um,
Yeah, like what each of us who has this country as our home, what each of us believes or values in terms of protecting and defending what is good in our homes. Like, wow, I feel like we're in a time of wide variation about that. Really divergent ideas about what that means. So, and here we are in a major transition in terms of leadership. So there's a vulnerability here that also feels like Mars and Cancer. Mars and Cancer feels like such a vulnerable experience. And I think that, yeah, collectively we're there, we're experiencing that. Mm.
yeah, yeah.
The only other thing that popped into my head as we're talking about this is for those who follow like retrograde cycles and entering shadow periods, Venus at the end of the month does enter it her shadow for her
Mm,
retrograde cycle, which is also
mhm.
going to dominate. So we'll be in this as you've been, talking about and sort of saying, "Ooh, guess what's coming? Mars and Venus both in retrograde cycles at the same time, early
Yeah.
2025. The end of the month, we start kicking off that co-retrograde
Yeah.
experience.
If there was like a little too much extra astrology, I think it would be beginning of 2025, like the first 4 months. It's like, really? also, because yeah, when we have, I mean, this is end of February, right? Mars stations direct finally, after months and months of being retrograde, and then like less than a week later, Venus stations retrograde in the sign of her exile. So, s- um, zesty. It's
It is that.
So, yeah, so we do have this ongoing Mars retrograde in the sign of Cancer this month. The Sun conjoins Pluto. It's applying on, I think that is it the 20th is Inauguration Day. It's
Yeah.
applying, and then the 21st it goes exact in my time zone. And yeah, and then we have the second of three Mars Pluto oppositions, which is happening while we're recording. So um and the first one, interestingly enough, and I think that this was we didn't even really quite realize how loud that was in early November, late October, early November, when we were doing our exorcism series.
Yes.
And what an appropriate topic for Mars opposite Pluto, right? Because we have this kind of penetration of the underworld, like
Yes.
penetration of what's behind the veil and this and like revelation, right? Or this kind of unleashing, bringing forth of the dark material. And that is that feels very Mars opposite Pluto, very exorcism-y, right? Like there's catharsis, there's release, but we don't always love what's, like, being released, right? Like, if you, like, lance an infected
Yes.
wound, right, like, ugh, it's kinda gross, very
Mhm.
gross. Yeah.
Yeah. Mars energy to go toward, to uncover, to get in there, that kind of ambitious forward driving to the underworld. That's a really bold thing to do. It
Mm.
takes courage and skill and discipline to do that in a way that doesn't just end in some kind of disaster. It was great to do that series and talk about like these are not this is not like woo woo hanging out. Um this was serious. Like, it was serious theologically and spiritually what we were talking about. We were talking about, like, danger that we can experience on a spiritual level, and I don't know, I it made me feel really, uh, there was something really cathartic about saying, like, this takes courage to go into the spiritual underworld, to go into places where we're really vulnerable, where we're not in charge, and to see what's down there. Anything that
Mm,
you've repressed or suppressed, if you use kind of a martial approach and say, okay, I'm facing this, I'm going towards this, especially a Pluto opposition. Like I'm going towards this. I want to find out what's under there. You want to make sure you're spiritually prepared, that you're equipped to do that kind of excavating work. And I think that being us doing that course and kind of looking at that and the possibility of what we remain open to being possessed by, and how to work with those parts of ourselves as the first part in the series of Mars Pluto oppositions because of the Mars retrograde cycle, I think makes me come to today and feel the sense of like I'm familiar with the like highly contentious and intense nature of this aspect because like we
mhm.
did that. We went towards that together. So it doesn't make it easy. Doesn't mean that the things that we're seeing in the hospital today are like fine or mundane or anything, but it does give me a sense of like feeling equipped.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it's their oppositions, right? I always think of the word confrontation, which might I mean, I think it could lend itself to squares too, but the literally like with your front, right? Like oppositions are chest to chest, like you are staring across the zodiac, right, to the other thing. It is like you have full vision, you have full sight of what is in front of you. And so I think of this Mars Pluto opposition, right, as this comfort courageous confrontation of what maybe you would really rather not acknowledge or maybe what you haven't been acknowledging, um, or what we haven't been acknowledging, right, on a collective level. Um, And then, of course, we're gonna see these things like this guy getting in his truck, right? And he was from Houston, right?
Yes.
Got in his truck and drove to New Orleans. And of course, the question, right, a natural question is, well, what possessed him to do that, right? And
Mhm.
so, getting into these topics of possession, right? Like, what are the things that come over us and kind of take us over, and how can we both you do the spiritual work of acknowledging the ways in which we become possessed by lots of different things, right? And how do we shore up and protect ourselves from those things, exercise those influences, and say,
Mhm.
like, I would like to, for this to not have power over me anymore. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I think those themes are coming up big time. And now this opposition is in is in Leo and Aquarius, whereas before it was at the very tail end of Cancer and Capricorn.
Right.
So there's this, even though we have a through line, right, from the first opposition, which was, oh God, what date? I don't have those dates. Wait,
I have
do I?
November 3rd, but I
November
don't
3rd. Yep, it is. It was November 3rd, to January 3rd, and then the next one is April 27th, right, when Mars is direct. So these are the Mars-Pluto opposition is the through line between those 3 dates, but we're now in a new sign, in a new
yeah.
axis. And so it's like the stories are connected, but the scenery has changed a bit, and Mars is now retrograde, and it's like, "Oh, well, with this new information that I have right
Mhm.
now, um, how am I going to deal with the undercurrents of what's going on in personal world, and how are we going to deal with the undercurrents of our collective world as well?"
That's what's up.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Um, yeah, wow. Well, I do hope that you are delivered through this transit in the hospital. I know that the Mars Pluto contacts and Mars Uranus contacts are always pretty intense.
Mm.
Along with, full moons, which, do we wanna talk about that, or do we wanna talk
Sure.
about the nodes changing? Because that actually does precipitate. Um,
Yeah, let's do the node. I mean,
okay.
I don't know
Yeah.
if we need to say much more about Mars going back into Cancer, but, that's
Yeah.
kind of a part of everything we've been talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. So, January 11th, the true node, right, there are different ways to measure, the way that the nodes move through the sky. They kind of, um vibrate almost, right? But they always have retrogradation. And so the nodes are the kind of high and low points of the moon's traveling through the sky, right? So when you hear that, when we're talking about the lunar nodes, right, they're connected to the moon. And these are the points famously where when the sun and the moon align, if they align on or close to the nodes, we get solar and lunar eclipses. So there's a quality of fadedness about the nodes. And in different traditions, the nodes kind of signify different things. I tend to favor what I learned from the Vedic tradition of astrology, which is that the nodes are malefic, um, meaning that they're extreme. They cause change. They can cause discomfort or strife that often will lead us to taking change, or they just sort of represent change that happens to us, right? That we don't really have a lot of control over. So some people might call that fate. Um, and so the nodes have been in Aries and Libra since July of 2023 at my nodal return. So I'm throwing a little party for myself
I was
that
gonna
I'm
say, yeah.
done done with that. Yes, 38, no joke, 37, 38. And that's when everyone has their second nodal return. So every 19 years we have a nodal return. So think about age 19. Whoa, right? And then those themes just keep like cropping for 19 years forever. So yeah, done with that. With the nodes in Aries and Libra, I mean, we saw what we often see with the nodes in Aries and Libra, which is like war, right,
Mhm.
or genocide, human rights violations, and then the blowback, right,
Mhm.
the protesting, the peacemaking. We saw a lot of like college, university protesting in response to Gaza. Um, and so, yeah, it was a very interesting time, and now we're moving into the next iteration of kind of what's going on in the zodiac and how that's represented in the world. Um, and yeah, I don't know, Sarah, do you want to say anything about just Aries Libra and what you noticed about that, or even if that meant anything for you in your own life?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my Aries and Libra areas of my own personal natal chart are really busy. So, and I'm an eclipse baby. So, there was a lot. Almost, it was like almost there's so much, it's hard to like nail down exactly how the nodes in the eclipse cycles were impacting everything because I have a stellium in Libra, which then means it's sending out all of that to all of those areas of the chart that are ruled by the planets, but also that my moon is there, but in Aries. But I was thinking, to add to what you are saying, I'm pretty intrigued about the nodes moving from a Mars Venus kind of experience, which has been the last 2 cycles, to back to a Jupiter Mercury. Jupiter Mercury signs,
Mhm,
like when they were in Sagittarius and Gemini before we,
mhm.
2 cycles ago. I'm I'm interested to see, and because of Saturn um having its time in Pisces, I'm interested to see what a North Node in Pisces, period, a North Node in Pisces, what is that gonna be like? But then also, yeah, what is the Jupiter Mercury axis for the nodes? And then with Saturn and Neptune um, active in Pisces and preparing to exit while we're in that nodal cycle, like what I'm wondering what that's all gonna feel like and be like.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm covering the nodes in our year ahead forecast that I'm
You
doing
are.
with Sam and Jonah tomorrow. And I I love researching the nodes and eclipses. I think it actually is one of the most reliable ways to
Mhm,
predict events. Um, and so I was looking through, I just did the last couple cycles of this. So looking at, let's see, 2006 and 7 and 1988 and 89.
mm,
And excuse me. That was the last 2 times that we had the North Node in Pisces and the South Node in Virgo, and, I noticed some really interesting trends for all of those years. I think the loudest, particularly, um, the kind of in the international world, was the dissolution and the formation of borders, nations,
yeah.
unions, treaties, like these sorts of things, the redemocratization of states. So that actually like gives me a lot of hope. I love that. Probably most famously in 1989 was the fall of the Berlin
Mhm,
Wall, and the dissolution of the Eastern Bloc. And so I think that it's really interesting. That also happened. The chart of the fall of the Berlin Wall um, beholds a Saturn Neptune conjunction, which
ah,
we're having this year. So just thinking of like like washing away
yeah,
Neptune and like the beach and the sea, like
yes.
washing away the Saturnian structures. Um, so and it was in a cardinal sign, it was in Capricorn. So we have another one of those in Aries this year. So that I thought was really fascinating to notice that.
That is fascinating to think about, the fall and empire or structure, but happening in like a dissolution, literally like the watery kind of way of something falling rather than something being exploded or being like trampled underfoot. This is like a crumbly, dispersing kind of thing. And that'll be interesting to watch for how that works. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there'll be, yeah, big changes just in like nation states
Mhm.
and the status of nation states, like becoming nation states, becoming independent, leaving, like leaving the EU, like things like that. Really interesting themes
Mhm.
with that. And then also a lot of human rights developments. So I also love that we see the like
Mhm.
arrest, prosecution, even execution of human rights violators during these eclipse periods. Um,
Mhm.
the UN Council for Human Rights, the Human Rights Council, was formed literally within 24 hours of an eclipse in this axis. So I think that's really interesting. So I think like all the human rights violations that we've been seeing in the
Yeah,
Aries Libra
right.
eclipses are going to kind of be brought to the stand under these eclipses. So there's some hopeful stuff. There's also some kind of freaky, scary stuff, right? Of course, like with weather, we get a lot of like typhoons, mudslides,
Mm.
tsunamis, floods. Um, so that's a little nerve-wracking. And then we'll also, I bet, see a lot of news around particles and particulates. So I noticed that during these times, it was when we were gathering like vapors from like Saturn's moon, from Venus, right? And like, and understanding like what is the particle makeup of some of these places in space. But then there are also like advancements in nuclear science, right, which can be scary. Also, I saw like advancements in DNA, like the human genome was mapped during these eclipses. And so if we bring that back to like Pisces, Virgo, right, I think it's like the little tiny things that
Yeah,
make up the universal, right? The particular
yes.
and the universal. So like DNA, right, is something we all have. All of our, like each of us have different DNA, but it connects all of us to each other, to the past, to the future. Um, and it's like what makes us human. But it's
Mhm.
also what makes us individuals. So I really think that's the sort of vibe um, with Pisces and Virgo eclipses and the nodes in these signs. And then the last thing I'll say that I noticed was like female firsts. So the first female bishop in the Episcopal Church
Mhm.
was is it appointed, elected? I'm not sure what the language is.
Could be elected and then
Yeah.
later consecrated, but yeah,
Okay.
elected. First they're
Yeah.
elected. Yeah.
Yeah. So first female bishop in the Episcopal Church under these eclipses. And then you also see like first female presidents of nations,
Mhm.
and female leaders of international organizations. So I just think of Venus's exaltation in
Thank
Pisces
you.
and
Yes.
the like exalting of women and femmes in this astro weather. So super interesting stuff. And while the nuclear stuff is a little scary and the weather stuff's a little scary, I don't know. This feels a little more hopeful, a little more like
Yeah.
Jupiterian than having the North Node in a sign ruled by Mars, right? So
Yeah, I
it's
was
kind of a
thinking that
nice
too.
recovery.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
the North Node in a benefic ruled place. I'm seeing like through all of these things that you've researched, like a theme of expanding, like expanding who can be the leader, expanding what will be governed, expanding structures, and then this Virgoan kind of
Yeah.
attention to the minutia. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does make me feel a little bit more excited. I mean, I feel like the last 2 eclipse cycles have been really intense, and it feels like, yeah, Mars Venus feels like the intensity that maybe I felt through those cycles. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this cycle will bring.
Mm. Yeah, and we move kind of more into the realm of like values,
Mhm.
ideas, right?
Yeah, these Jupiterian things.
Words like what are our okay, well, we value human rights, so let's like legislate or make this international organization that writes reports on human rights and recommends that certain people be removed from power. So
Mm.
yeah, super, super interesting. Um, so that is January 11th, when the nodes shift. And do we want to talk about our lunations? And I
Yeah,
think I
let's
think
do.
then we've mostly covered everything that the loudest parts of January on a collective level. So here is the chart for our full moon this month. This is January 13th. Um, so we are really quite close to the Sun Mars
Mm.
opposition, right? So we're at this sort of like Mars retrograde moment. So when the Sun and Mars are opposite one another, it is astronomically when Mars we are closest to Mars in the sky. And if you've been out at night, it is unmistakable thing to see Mars. It is bright red, right up there, because Mars is very bright. It's receiving, we're seeing the full reflection, right? It's like a full moon. Um, we're seeing the full reflection of the sun. It's very bright and it's very close and it's very loud. And so if we're looking at this chart, it's a little yikes.
It is a little yikes.
It's a
Thanks for
little
saying that.
yikes. And that is because, right, we have this full moon, and it is right next to Mars. So it will be beautiful to observe out in the sky. And right after the sun sets, right, we'll be seeing Mars and the moon rising up from the west, up through from the east, up through the sky. And so yeah, I think it will be lovely to look at, might be a little painful to experience.
We
So,
might be
uh,
crying while we gaze.
yeah, it's an interesting thing too to notice that there's a sextile, exact sextile between Uranus and the moon
Yes.
during this full moon. So, 23 degrees. And so there is an element of this moon being really directly connected to the Uranus and Taurus story that we've been living through for the past, what, like 8 years now or 7 years now. Um, and so you can kind of check out that part of your chart, the house that Taurus is in, and kind of what's been going on there. This moon might really activate, uh, you know, that dynamic. The moon's in her own sign, which we love for her. But I would also say, under these sorts of transits, I would also say be very cautious about what you're eating around this time
Mm.
because
That's
this
good
is
advice.
this is a great transit for food poisoning. Yeah, so just like maybe like don't go out for sushi
I was
around this
thinking
transit,
water
right?
related things especially.
Yeah, yeah, I would just be careful about things that could make you kind of it's bad tummy vibes for sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, is there anything else that you're noticing about this chart, Sarah?
Well, also Mars, Neptune, as I'm looking at the chart, are trine that just for me reemphasizes the I don't expect this full
Right.
moon to be illuminating in any particular way. I think it's going to exacerbate whatever the Mars retrograde story is. Like, this is Mars retrograde as fast as it's going to be, right? So it's
Yeah.
this most momentum kind of in the looking back kind of mode. And so I think there's going and trine Neptune feels to me like adding this sort of sense of like confusion or like what did I learn? What do I know?
Mhm.
What is my source of reassurance? I just don't see a lot of that here. Not to mention the
Yeah.
sextile with Uranus. It feels like it hits a lot of points of like confusion and feeling like undertow.
Yeah, it's a weird one. And you know, I think with Mars retrograde, and particularly in the sign of its fall, one thing I didn't say was I think like there's the signification of Mars and strategy. It's sort of like I don't even know how to strategize around like whatever
Yeah,
the thing is. Like I don't even
that
know.
makes
And
sense.
I'm anticipating conversation around this time of the month. That's
Mm.
gonna be like we a a really uncomfortable, like unfortunate thing is going on. And we're not really quite sure what to do about it, but we're all like pretty upset and angry, about
Yeah.
it. And so not to like project my life onto the astrology and onto everyone else, but just thinking about like I can see how the dynamics are coming through there and that people might be experiencing something similar where it's like, I don't know even what the fuck to do about this problem that I'm
Mhm.
having. And so my advice is to is to honestly, like, wait as long as you
Yeah.
can to try to come to a solution and, you know, come to if there are problems that you're experiencing or trying to address right now, like, what is the best short-term temporary fix? Um, because at the end of February, when Mars goes direct, I think it's gonna become a lot more clear what needs to happen and what needs to be done. So, you know, if you can sort of, regulate, until
Mhm.
the end of February, that's my best advice for dealing with all this, and Sarah, I don't know if you have anything else to add to.
I think it might be especially challenging. The weight message is usually especially challenging for people who are like Martial ruled or who have very significant Martial placements. So, like Aries and Scorpio rising, I think it may be especially difficult to hear the weight message. And I'm thinking about, um, like, as someone who has a lot of uh, significant Mars placements, I rarely believe that waiting is going to be the best option. And so, this, like, having an astrological forecast where you can literally see that it's going to be better to wait, whatever is coming up around this full moon, it's going to be better to wait, is some of the best preventative medicine for all of us, as you're saying. But I think I wanted to throw my thing in there for especially for people who might be Mars ruled or have significant Mars
Mm,
placements. There's
yeah.
usually a way
Scorpio,
that you can wait.
Aries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's usually a way you can wait. And if you know that now, before the pressure is on in that moment, it may be easier to sort of believe that. And yeah, it's just preventative medicine to think about it that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're saying
And
that.
And a little, like, boost of hope is that soon, in not many months, in June, Jupiter is moving into Cancer, where Mars is, like, ravaging, giving a
Doing it.
really,
Yes. That's
yeah,
good. Yeah.
bad return. Um, Jupiter is moving in there in June into the sign of its exaltation. So whatever's happening in the Cancer area of your chart is probably feeling quite, like, raw. And then, like, Jupiter's gonna move in, and it's probably gonna be so much better. So, mid-month, mid-January, whatever the, like, loud, hard, awful thing is, right? Or, like, super challenging. Maybe it's not awful, but it's a grind, right? Like, it's a slog. Like, when will this ever be done, right? Um, is gonna feel a lot better in the summer. I really do think. So keep the faith. That's a
That's
very
a
Jupiter
really
thing to say.
right. That's a great message, though. It's really true.
Yeah, yeah,
The benefic is coming.
yeah. So let me pull up the new moon chart here. Okay, so we have our new moon in Aquarius. This is January 29th. Um, and it's at 9 degrees Aquarius. So, um, Sarah, what are your first kind of takes on this chart? I'm noticing the action in Aquarius and the action in Pisces as well.
Yeah. So right away for me, the sun is in detriment here in Aquarius. So every year we have our new moon Aquarius. We're in a time where the sun is f- perhaps feeling weakened in solar things that the sun wants to do.
Mhm.
So for me, this is, starting a very long cycle where Pluto will be co-present with the sun in detriment for these new moons that we're going to have once a year. But I think for me, this like 9 degrees is a little bit, at least there's some space. Feels like it's not going to be all about Pluto is now here in Aquarius for me. And even Mercury, like Pluto, Mercury are having a little story for sure right around this time. But for me, I think I'm not as like, plus Mars has gone back into Cancer. And so we're not in an opposition like, we're not having to keep
Yeah,
track of an opposition here for this lunation.
that's
It's an
nice.
aversion to Saturn and Neptune and the things that are going on there. So there is a lot going on in Pisces that we want to probably look at and talk about. But in terms of the lunation, it doesn't feel like it's going to be about those things. So for me, I felt a little bit of calm here. It doesn't look
Mhm.
happy. It doesn't look triumphant. It doesn't look like any of those things. but it looks like a little bit of like a breath, like a slow breath, like not a powerful breath, but just like a recovery moment, perhaps, like a little bit
Yeah.
of rest in the dark is what I saw.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we are in, we didn't even mention this, but we're moving into Aquarius season in January, right? And this is the second Saturn ruled season in a row. So we get Capricorn season when the winter solstice hits and the sun's at its lowest point. The sunlight's slowly coming back, but I think Aquarius season is like the time in winter when everyone's like, when is the winter going to be over? I
Yeah.
really cannot handle any more of this, especially once you get into like the second week of February and you're like, all I have to look forward to is Lent for Valentine's Day. Are you serious? Like overpriced prefix menus? Like, cool. So yeah, very like sun in detriment mode. Um, and I do like there's a trine to Jupiter here.
Yeah.
Um, and also I noticed Uranus is stationing direct the next day. So Uranus is
Mm.
kind of at a standstill. So um, I'm kind of thinking like in the time that's transpired since the full moon, right? Like, which really was activating Uranus, like Uranus has slowed down tremendously and is kind of coming back around. So I also sense a little bit of like the new beginnings of some
Yeah.
resolution happening around maybe the topics or issues that are coming up in the sign of your of Taurus right now for folks. Um, so yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we're getting closer to. Or I guess. Wait, did we miss a Mars Uranus sextile? Does that happen? Yeah, that happens on the 23rd. So we're on the other side of a Mars Uranus
Mhm.
contact. I mean, it's a sextile, but I feel like Mars Uranus contacts are always kind of rough or what aspect is being made. So yeah, it does feel like on the other side of a hump
Mm.
and maybe just like taking a big or offering a big exhale um into the world here. So um, yeah, yeah. Interesting, interesting lunation. Kind of quiet. Maybe looks like resting a little bit. Recovering, I would say. Yeah. Um, and we have Venus in here. I mean, just noticing, and I think that that's probably another fairly significant transit of January, right? Is that we have a Venus Saturn conjunction on the
Yeah.
18th. So just a few days after that full moon. Um, So the middle of the month is uncomfortable, I would say. I
Yeah.
think I think it's highly uncomfortable. Um, but then it kind of like there's some resolution, I think, or at least some rest after that discomfort that the new moon brings.
Yeah. The sun goes into Aquarius and is finished by the time we get here, is finished with its conjunction with Pluto, which I have my eye on that. Just
Mm,
whatever that's gonna feel like. So yeah, wrapping up
yeah,
the end of the month with this new moon, sort of like, okay, what's next? That kind of
yeah,
feeling.
yeah, yeah. I think there may be some events surrounding the inauguration. I'm thinking there may or the something that kind of feeds into events that happen in March and April around the eclipses, around the retrogrades in Aries, all that. So
Yeah.
um yeah. So take good care of yourselves, everyone. Mid-month, especially try to practice your best I think non-violence
Mhm.
um in your dealings in your communications and yeah, really maybe try to put off um unnecessary changes or unnecessary abrasions really until a bit later when the energy has cooled off a bit, I think.
And the air clears a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think do you have anything else to say about January, Sarah? I think I've said plenty.
Yep. Those are the main things, I think.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, wonderful to do this with you as always. And yeah, I think I'm going to try to get this out today on Friday. And So there still will be time if you're watching this to register for our year ahead forecast that I'm doing tomorrow with Jonah Emerson Bell and Sam Reynolds. And if you miss it, we're going to sell the playback. So don't fret about that. I think it's going to be really good. And if nothing else, it is going to be really good. And it's going to be funny because Jonah and Sam are like stand-up comics. So I'm just there to laugh.
It
So
does sound like a great group. Oh,
it's
that's gonna
really
be
fun.
great.
It's really fun. Yeah. So, and is there anything going on in your work or world that you want to share about, Sarah?
No.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, take it easy, everyone, and we'll be back next month.